Good day. You're listening to the Spiritual Artist Podcast. This is Chris Miller, your host, and I am thrilled today. In fact, it's hard for me to stop laughing because I've already been talking to our guest today, and she is hilarious. So I'm going to introduce you to Glass Artist Amy Voss. Good morning, Amy.
Hello. Good morning.
It's nice to see you. I think this is really fun because behind me, I have a painting, which is what I do. And then behind you, you have samples of your work, which is really fun, right?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's fun. I mean, it's not fun when I cut myself, but you know, that's part of the gig, right?
That is part of the gig. We're going to explain what she means by cutting herself in just a minute.
Yeah, it's not like a, self-harm situation. So don't be alarmed.
Okay. So what's really fun here is I try to scout out people to feature on my podcast. And as we know with the creative process, we can do all the planning we want, but sometimes things just happen. And that's where you have to be in the creative section. You have to be where things just happen. So I had gone to an art show. I was kind of scouting out a specific person to interview or to head up for my podcast. And I ran into Amy, and I've seen her before, but we started talking and we just had the most wonderful chemistry. I loved her work. And I was walking away and my husband turned to me and said, "Why aren't you interviewing her?" And
wow, thanks to the hubs.
I know. He goes, "She's clearly a spiritual artist." And I was like, you're right. You're right. Why am I not interviewing her? So let me tell you a little bit about Amy. She grew up in Houston, Texas. She's in Dallas, Texas now. She graduated from SMU, Southern Methodist University. And after graduating college, she spent, I think, 10 years working in the entertainment industry as a promotions director. And she worked for Lyric Street Records, affiliate relations director for ESPN Radio and ABC Television Network. So kind of cool. She has all that professional background in the music industry, and you're going to hear why that's important to this podcast. So she stepped out and entered motherhood, which a lot of us have done. And when she was doing that, she discovered her passion for working with glass. So Amy is a glass artist, and you can see some pictures behind some of her work behind her. She's a self-taught artist. She experimented with various approaches before she landed on her signature style. And you can see this in the picture. I'm just going to let her talk, but there are guitars that she uses glass on the outside of. So Amy, I mean, obviously you come from the music industry.
Right.
So
that's where it all started.
So how did you connect these two? What was the move?
I don't know. It just kind of happened organically. If I take it really far back, when I was about 12 years old, my parents took me to Italy and we went to Venice. And we took a gondola over to this glass factory where they have, it's glass blowing basically. And that was the first time I'd ever done anything like that or experienced anything like that. And the glass that they were making was just so beautiful. And I think that was the first time I kind of fell in love with glass. And fast forward to, several years later, I have a huge passion for music, always have. And my career started in the music business. And that was just, it was a dream come true for me to be able to channel my passion for music into my job, right? And then, fast forward 10 years later, I get pregnant and I know that this is probably going to be my only child. So I didn't necessarily I didn't want to miss anything of his life. So I quit my job. We also moved from New York to Washington, D.C. And, that required me to quit my job, obviously. And I was contemplating going back to work. But then, when I found out I was pregnant, I was like, nah, I'm going to take this journey and I don't want to miss anything. Right. But I can't sit still. I have to be doing something. And so a friend of mine invited me over for lunch one day, and she was an artist and she had all different kinds of mediums. She painted, she, did like mosaics and things like that. And she had done, and what's funny is I actually do not like mosaics at all. Like when I think of mosaics, I think big chunky pieces of glass with huge grout lines, and I'm like, bleh. So, but she had done this type of mosaic on a guitar, and that was just, it just kind of hit me. I was like, that is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Just the whole idea of creating a piece of art on something other than a canvas or something other than a square or a round, right? It was using the guitar as a canvas. And, you know, the body of a guitar is super sexy and it's curvy. It's kind of like a woman, right? And I don't know, just something in me was like, that is really cool. I got to try and do this, but kind of hone it in a different way that it wasn't so mosaic-y in a way that I didn't really like. I didn't like that type of medium, right? So I wanted to be more focused on the glass as opposed to, you know, the process of it, if that makes any sense. Or the name, right? The mosaic name. So I wanted it to be more of like a glass sculpture on a guitar as opposed to a mosaic, if that makes any sense.
Well,
yeah.
no, it's funny because when we were talking and we talked about that, the word mosaic, obviously you didn't like that word.
It's like the F word in my language.
It is. And you know, what's funny, you know, we have to learn, we learn to get past words, right? Because words are just words and they're just the best attempt to define something. Right. And so what you found is that word was in the way and I'm glad you just threw it out.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. Totally. And I was like, yeah, we're not going to go that route. We're going to try and go a different route. But, you know, kind of when you pave a different road, it's a hell of a lot bumpier than you expect it to be because you don't have anything to really give you guidance or backup or, you know, anything to compare it to, you know, so doing something this different and unique is kind of a blessing and a curse, you know. It's a blessing because it is super different and unique and I love that about it. But it's a curse because nobody really does it and some people don't really understand it. And it's hard for them to see past it being a musical instrument as opposed to just a canvas, right? It was funny. I did this event in Austin many years ago and it was for the classical guitar foundation in Austin, Texas. And they wanted me to create a bunch of guitars for this event. And so I did, and, you know, had them all on display and the people, it was not my crowd, man. The people there were mortified. I was like, they were like the PETA of guitars. It was like, how could you do this to a guitar? And I'm like, listen, man, like, this is like an old ass guitar. Like, I'm not taking a $5,000 Gibson and ripping it to shreds. This is not what this is about. Because when I started, I would try and recycle acoustic guitars, right? Used acoustic guitars. But then I kind of became like, I started to become a guitar repair person. I'm like, yeah, no, this is not my gig. I'm not about, you know, I want to create something beautiful out of it. I don't want to have to repair it first. So now I just use, really cheap, acoustic guitars that don't have damage to them.
I think that's funny that you talk about that going into that wasn't your crowd. And I've been doing a lot of reading recently on embarrassment. And that as artists, we have to be willing to be embarrassed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, pretty much in life, right?
Right.
I mean, everything you do in life, nothing's going to be perfect. You're going to go against the grain no matter what you do. At some point, you're going to be embarrassed and you just have to roll with it, right?
Well, I love that. So these people probably came up to you and they're like, they don't play. I imagine these guitars are not playable or anywhere, right?
No, but it's funny. I get that question all the time, all the time. And at first, when I first started getting that question, I just kind of like laughed it off. And then now I'm like, do you see any strings on it? Like, am I missing something here? Like, I mean, but hey, everybody has to ask questions and that just happens to be a really popular one.
Do you play guitar yourself?
No, I don't, which is funny. I don't. I play the piano. I played the piano when I was younger, and I could maybe read, I could read sheet music and, stumble over a song, but no, I don't play any musical instruments. It's funny. I always my dream job was to be a chick drummer in a rock band. And so my husband several years ago, he was like, all right, we're totally going to do this. I'm like, yeah, we are. So for Christmas, he bought me a drum set. Well, in walks my child, who at the time was probably 5, 6 years old. And he's like, oh, I want to do this. So he takes over the drum set, and I never touched the damn thing. My kid is now actually a really good drummer. But yeah, no musical instrument, talent.
Well, I see that as a future project. You could do this glass on a entire piano.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that would take me forever, right? I actually did do a drum. I did like an actual drum. I took the material out and just put a piece of wood on the inside of it, and then glassed the piece of wood. It was actually really cool. Oh, so wow. Anything that has wood on it, I can do for sure. So
now, how do you change it? You mentioned earlier that one of the reasons you don't like the term mosaic is you picture big grout lines. Do you not use grout, or do you?
I try not to. So when I cut my glass, it's funny because it's a lot more brain activity than you would think when you're in this process, because it's like a puzzle, right? You're putting together, you're breaking down the pieces of glass, and then you're putting it all back together on the guitar, right? And so when I try, when I go through my whole process, I try to keep the pieces of glass as close together as possible, so there isn't a whole lot of grout line to be seen. However, I started using Frit, which is crushed up glass. So basically, if you took a sheet of glass and smashed it to pieces, you would get Frit. And they have like just really cool different types of Frit, and a lot of what I use is dichroic Frit. So it's got that iridescence to it and that shine. And so what I'll do is if I end up with, and sometimes the design will lend itself to where I'll put pieces together and there'll be, big gaps in between. Instead of filling it with grout, I'll fill it with Frit. And that adds like a whole different layer of texture to it. And it just has a really cool look. So I've found different things, different types of, products and, glass things to incorporate into each design to where I don't have to use as much grout. But the finishing outline of every guitar is obviously grout. And then I put resin over that because it hardens that barrier. Because over time, obviously the grout will, get soft and, can crumble and things like that. And I don't want that to happen. So sealing it and then sealing it with the resin gives a barrier to where it will last forever. I mean, these things are pretty much indestructible. There's so much damn glue on them.
What do you mean you use grout as the outline? Explain that.
So the outside, see how like I have a little, I'm pointing towards the outline of
that's
the guitar.
Good. Yeah.
Right there,
that's
right?
Grout.
That is grout. And actually on this particular guitar, I just incorporated something different too, because again, I hate grout. So I'm like, how can I get rid of this shit so that I don't have to look at it anymore? And I thought about painting it, but then I'm like, no, that's going to look stupid. And then putting the resin over it really made a difference because it kind of gave it a shine, right? Because it has that natural shine. But then I found gold leaf gilding. And I was like, okay, let me put this over the grout line and see what it looks like. And I think it actually looks really cool. And so instead of looking at a grout line, you're looking at, just silver leaf gilding is what it is.
I had no idea. I had no idea that you had that in there.
And these guitars behind me are the first ones I ever did with that, that leaf over the grout line. I had never done that before. So I actually really like it. So I'm actually going to try and incorporate it into the next guitar I use, and actually incorporate it into the actual design, not just the barrier or the border of the body of the guitar, basically the edges, if you will.
Wow. I mean, I would never have guessed that. So when you talk about this, are you using like some artists, painters, they pour a resin over and it's kind of thick over the whole thing. Are you doing that, or are you doing more like a spray on resin type thing?
I did cover an entire guitar in resin. I did a Dr. Dre guitar and covered the entire thing in resin. And it's cool. I mean, I love it, but it has more of a manufactured look to it. It kind of looks like it came out of a factory, And I don't really like that. That's part of what I love about what I do is the glass is super raw. Like there's no firing of it. I don't put it in a kiln. The edges are sharp. I do use a Dremel, and I go around, parts of the guitar with a Dremel to try and soften those edges. Because if you ran your hand down a guitar, I mean, you would cut yourself, obviously. But that's part of what I love about the design is that it's raw and it's the ultimate edgy piece of art, right? So I don't soften it, if you will. And the way that the glass comes to me, I get like sheets of glass, and then I cut the pieces from that sheet however I want them to look using various tools. And so however it comes to me is how it goes in pieces on the guitar. I don't change anything about the glass. And that's part of what I love about it, right?
So how do you, if you don't pour, if you only did that once, pouring some sort of a sealer over it, how do you do what is the final coat on these?
So, well, there really is none. I mean, the glass is what it is. When I say I use resin to, do the borders where the grout lines are, I use a paintbrush. So I mix the resin in a cup, I dip my paintbrush in there, and then I apply it along the edges of the grout border around the body of the guitar. And each edge of the guitar that has those grout lines, I paint resin over it to make sure that it holds and is strong enough to sustain, obviously years and years. So, because I mean, resin's like cement, it's not going anywhere. So yeah, that's the only like seal, if you will, that is on the guitar. Everything else, it is what it is. I mean, there's no lacquer, no spray, no, anything like that I put over it.
Well, I ask you that because a lot of artists love, it just depends on your preference, but a lot of artists love to pour something over it. And I've done that, but I feel like it isolates me from the work.
Right.
And I almost feel like I see a lot of shine and reflection, but I don't see the color.
Yeah.
And I do know that when I saw your guitars hanging in the gallery, and when I see them now, and behind you, they're white, and I'll get some photos from you, and I will intersperse them in this video so people can see how colorful some of your work is. But they catch the light so wonderfully.
Yeah, they do. And that's why I don't want to, that's why I didn't really like when I say the resin coverage looked manufactured. That's why I didn't really like that, because it took away from the shine and the ambiance of the glass. Because the different types of glass I use, some of it's flat, some of it's iridescent. And when the light hits it, you get a cascade of so many different colors, not just the color of the actual glass. And it's really cool. And that's part of what I love about it. But yeah, I mean, it is as real of a piece of, a product, real as a piece of art as you can get, as real and raw and edgy as you can get, kind of like me. it's if like a personality would come out in a piece of art, this suits me to a T.
Well, I strongly believe that. I do believe that we come out in our art and who we are. And I was working on something. I'm working on my show, and I want to talk about that too, because my upcoming solo show is based on music. And I am painting a painting by listening to one song over and over and over again.
Oh man, that sounds like me when it comes to finding new music. Every time I find a new song that I love, it's ridiculous how many times I will listen to it over and over again. And my son's like, "Are you still listening to this song?" I'm like, "Shut up, man. Like, I like it, okay?" I always say, like, if I could have learned like academics and my schoolwork the way that I learn song lyrics, I would be a fucking genius.
Well, it's so funny. I realized I learned on Spotify that if you click the little thing, you can repeat it, and it just plays and plays and plays. And so I was working on a piece this week, and I called a friend and I asked him how to do a process quicker. I said, "Well, how can I paint this texture on quicker?" And he said, "What are you trying to do?" And I said, "Well, I have the show coming up, and I have to get all these pieces done. I'm trying to get through it." He said, "Oh, Chris, you can't rush the creative process. You have to be present. What are you trying to do? You rush through it." And he was right. And I'm ashamed to, part of embarrassment, listeners, is I'm going to share this with you. We all have that temptation to fall into rushing through something.
Right.
But creativity takes time.
Yeah, it does. It does. I mean, I've been doing this for 13 years and I have tried so hard to find a way to make the process go faster. Because sometimes I get stuck on one guitar and it gets boring, and the design after a while it gets boring, and I'm like, ugh, if I could just, hurry this up. But I've tried so many different things. I've tried so many different ways to grout it differently so that the cleaning process doesn't take as long, or cutting a bunch of glass first and being able to run through the design as quick as possible because I already have the glass cut, as opposed to cutting as I go. I've tried it so many different ways and nothing, I mean, it all turns out to be the same amount of time. So it's like, it is what it is. I mean, and you either enjoy the process for what it is, or you don't, and you shouldn't be doing it. Right. It's all part of it. It's all part of art.
You're right. And he said that to me and I was like, oh, you're right. And he said, the work requires your attention and it requires your time. And I think that's why when I see your guitars and why people react the way they do is they feel that, I call it that conscious connection, right? They feel that you're engaged with it. Even the boring areas, even the redundant, and actually, especially the boring areas, because there is no boring area in the final work if you're conscious with it, right?
It's funny because sometimes I will look at my pieces after they're finished and I'm like, how in the hell did I do that? Like, I don't even remember going through the process. You know what I mean? And because it is a process. I mean, I start by stripping the guitar down, and then I, have to prep the surface, and then I have to pick the glass colors, and then I have to figure out how I want the glass laid and how I want the pieces cut, and how I mean, it's a very forward thinking process because I have to think about the next step before I do the current step, because everything affects the next thing. Right. And at certain times of the process, whether it's the glass cutting or it's the grouting or it's, the layers of Frit that I use, because it's not just one, it's like 4 different layers, or if it's the cleaning and I use a toothpick to clean the grout, and at each point in the process, I have to check myself and kind of say to myself, okay, how am I feeling today? And am I patient enough? And am I with it enough to be able to do this? Because if I'm not, then I just got to walk away and come back another day, because that's just part of it. Right. And there are days when I like have plenty of time and I'm excited to sit down and just not think about anything else going on in my life and focus just on one process of my artwork. And then there's days where I don't have that time. So I step away from it because it's not something that I can do quickly. I have to have that time,
you give me, when you said that, I got goosebumps. Okay. Because when you said that you have to be present and that you walk away, sometimes you have to walk away.
Yeah.
And so when I was talking to my friend, actually, and I'll share this with the listeners, it was John Domont, who has an interview earlier about a year ago that you should listen to. I'll put it at the end of this. But he said, when you do good, he said, well, why are you rushing? And I said, well, I worked really hard this weekend and I'm tired and I need to move ahead. And he said, no, you need to relax, because when you do hard work, and creativity it's work.
It's exhausting. It's exhausting. It weighs on your mind, right?
Yes.
It takes brain power to come up with that shit.
I know it does. And it's so funny. He said to me, you need to honor that you worked hard, sit back and relax, and only go back in, like you were saying earlier, only go back in when you are ready to give the work what it requires.
Yeah. Give it your full attention. It's like with anything. It's like with parenting or, being with your spouse, and, when you go in, you got to go in full blown, balls to the wall, or don't go in at all, save it for another day. It just, if funny enough, I am the most impatient person in the world. You would never know it looking at my artwork, right? But that is the moment where I am forced to be patient. I don't have a choice, because if I'm not, then it fucks up what I'm trying to do, right? And the whole art process that I've gone through has really taught me so much, just that I can take into my daily life. And the biggest thing is you just got to be patient. You got to let the game come to you, and it's hard to apply that to my life every single day. And there's more days that I can't than I do. But when it comes to art, that's the one time that I am fully focused and putting forth so much patience that it hurts.
You know, that's probably why, don't you think that's why you're attracted to this discipline, the glass, because it requires that kind of focus?
Yeah, it's a challenge, because it's always a challenge. It's never not challenging. And it's funny because, you know, people have, I do a lot of more commission work than I do, you know, just making work on my own. And when people, you know, request commissions, I get super nervous because I'm like, oh shit, what if it's something I can't do or that I've never done before? But it forces me out of my comfort zone, and just, it forces me to figure out a way to do it, figure out how to make it work. And I did a Queen guitar for the gallery here in Dallas. And I was like, how in the hell am I going to do this? Because I did, you know, that, you know, iconic Queen design where every element of the design was given as, you know, a representative symbol by each member of the band, which is kind of cool. And I didn't know that. And I researched that before I did it, because I was like, is there any way that I can skirt around this design? Like, can I just do like this and not incorporate this and this? And there's like these little like fairy god children that are in the design, and they're so hard to draw. And I cannot draw, I cannot paint. So, you know, when I start with a design, I used to print the design out, blow it up to the size that I would want it, and then trace it onto the guitar. And then I was like, well, there's got to be an easier way to do this. So I got a projector, and that was the first time on that guitar that I'd ever used a projector. And it was still difficult because I'm like, because again, I can't draw, so I can't just freehand it, right? So I'm trying to do this, and I'm like, do I have to do these fairies? Like, can't I just do the like abstract version? But then when I looked up what the design meant, I'm like, well, those are Freddie Mercury's contribution to the design. I can't leave those off because he's the fucking lead singer of the band. So I had to just figure it out. And it took me probably 17 times to draw that shit on the guitar before I finally got it to where, okay, when you look at it, you can see all the elements of the design, but it's time consuming, and it requires an immense amount of patience that sometimes I don't have. But yeah, but that's the part of what I enjoy, and what draws me to it is that challenge, and that, okay, you know, what can I come up with this time, right?
Yeah, you know, oh my gosh, there's a couple of things you said. So I love it. So one of the things I want to share is what I'm doing with this upcoming show is I'm picking a song, and I'm doing like you did. You talked about, I'm doing research, right? I've been listening to all these songs that have a strong emotional chord with me, something that resonates. And of course, Queen has a few, it's on my list. There's a couple of their songs on my list because he's such a powerful, emotional singer. Right. I think that's why people fall in love with certain musicians, is they're so present, like you said, and they're so powerful. And so he is definitely one of them. And I want to also share with you what I would task you to do, is kind of what I'm doing, is, you know, it'd be fun for you is to find find a song that you just love, and say, this guitar is for me. This isn't for someone else. This is for me. Right. And just paint it based on that song.
Yeah.
And see where it takes you, because obviously you love music, right?
I do. I love the emotional connection that a song gives you. I love everything about a song. I love the melody. I love the way the song is constructed. I love the lyrics and the meaning behind the lyrics, and how the lyrics move from the bridge to the chorus. And I mean, I don't think I ever realized, I always said I was passionate about music, but I don't think I ever realized the depths of my passion for music, and the littlest things about songs, whether it's a riff or this little moment in the song that gives an instrumental aspect, or it's the background vocals that make that part of the song so fantastic. You know, I mean, that's, I don't know. I kind of feel like everybody's life has a soundtrack in different phases, right? Like you grow, you know, if you grew up in the 70s or the 80s, that you know, that genre of music, you know, reminds you of that time in your life. And then as you work through your life, different songs, if you're a music lover, you know, are pinpoint into that particular moment, right? And so songs take you back. They take you back, and then they take you forward. And you know, that's just part of what I love about it. And I know it kind of probably sounds silly, but that's yeah, it's a huge passion for sure.
No, I don't. It doesn't sound silly at all. I find that as I've done the research for this project and listening to music, and I get so emotional, right? I mean, I listen to the songs over and over again. I'm falling asleep to the songs, and I just feel, I get swelled up with that sense of emotion. And you're right. There's so many different aspects to a song. There's the lyrics, and sometimes the lyrics are they're nonsensical, right?
They don't make any sense, right? Yeah.
Right. You're sitting there going, what is he saying here? And yet the feeling of it. I mean, Elton John is classic, you know, where
he was in my mind the minute you said that. That's so wild. Yes, Elton can do that. Like, he's got a way of, the lyrics you don't really get it, but the way that the song is constructed with the melody, the emotion that comes out of it, doesn't matter what he's saying. It matters how it makes you feel, right?
I love it.
Yeah.
It does. It matters how it makes you feel. And I think that's what I think my goal is with art. It's what the piece makes people feel.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly. And that's why we can't really judge anybody else's art, because it's all coming from a place that's personal to them. Right. And really what it's all about is, how does that make you feel? And how do you resonate with that? And, you know, and that's the best part of what I do, is the reaction I get from people when they see my work. Sometimes it's, you know, gut wrenching if they don't get it, but hey, some people aren't going to, and that's okay. But when they do, and when they have that reaction and they're like, oh my gosh, that's so cool, I've never seen anything like that before, that's the greatest moment of my life. Because I'm like, oh yes, they get it, right? So yeah, it's interesting how it all kind of works together.
It's funny you say that. I always find one of the most challenging, if you want to talk about stepping out in embarrassment, one of the most challenging things you can do is stand next to your work during a showing and not let people know that it's your work.
Yeah, that's my favorite thing to do, actually, because I love to people watch. I love to just stand back and like see what people are all about. But yeah, my favorite thing to do is to stand, like you said, stand by my work and just see people's reaction and listen to their comments. And it's really funny because 90% of the time they think the artist is a man.
How interesting.
I know. Isn't that wild?
And they'll say, he did this.
Yeah, which I kind of get, but yeah, no, it's not.
But you have to be willing to hear it, you know, and they'll say stuff.
Absolutely. I was at a show one time and I had done a Willie Nelson guitar, and I don't typically like to do faces unless it's an abstract version of it, because the body of the guitar is so small that if I try to do an intricate face, it would not be legible. It would just be kind of too difficult to make out, if that makes sense. So I tried to do like an abstract version of Willie Nelson, and this guy comes up and he's staring at the guitar and he's like, that's the ugliest face I've ever seen. And I was like, okay, cool. That's all right. And he's like, yeah, I don't get it. Like, why would you do that to a guitar?
Well, it is Willie Nelson. I mean,
right. And I was like, well, I could try to explain it to you, but it's really not worth my time at this point. Because you've already made up your mind that you don't like it. So let's just move on.
Well, I like how you said that. I had earlier, you said what's important about art is your experience when you make it. And it's your own personal expression. And you were saying it doesn't, you're right. There will always be people that don't get you.
Yeah.
There always will be. And it's a challenge.
More so than not.
Yeah. You know, it's a challenge. I had an experience early this week, and okay, I'm thinking, should I share everything? Or so someone had posted I've got my book on Amazon and people post wonderful things, but someone posted a mediocre review.
Yeah.
And they said something like, all these ideas I've heard before. And immediately it triggers me. It triggered me into a spiral of like, whatever you call it, shame or unapproval. And I sat down and thought, what is the spiritual truth here? And the spiritual truth is, I think it took me 55 years to put that book together. Literally, the lessons in that book took 55 years. I think they're very profound and I think they're very varied. And it's about me. And
yeah, absolutely. Right? Yeah. You have to get to a point in your life where you really have zero fucks to give, right? I mean, honestly, and it's taken me a long time to get to that point. And back to what you said, you know, some people are going to get you and some people aren't. I mean, more so than not, people just don't get me. And that's okay. Like, I don't expect them to. You know, you surround yourself with people that do get you, and that's what gets you through life, right? Is that the core group of people that understand who you are and why you are the way you are and why you live the life that you live and create the art that you create. But yeah, I mean, but then also on the flip side of that, if you're going to put yourself out there, which it's taken me a long time to be able to do, you have to be able to take the good with the bad, right? And not try and take it personally. And that's kind of how I get through moments like that, where, because perfect example, I posted a video of these new guitars, these new monochromatic guitars that I just finished on TikTok. And it was the same video I posted on Instagram. I just posted it on TikTok, and the music behind it, the music behind it says this is a work of art, and it's like a techno beat type situation song, right? And somebody commented, not really. And I mean, me, given my personality, I wanted so bad to like respond and be like, well, thankfully nobody fucking asked you, asshole. but I didn't. I exercised an immense amount of restraint. And I just thought, you know what? That person obviously doesn't get it. And I don't know what's going on in their life today, but apparently somebody pissed in their Cheerios and I'm just going to move on. Right. But that's kind of what we have to do when we're, again, like, art is so personal, and it's really difficult to take what you create and put it out there because it's a vulnerability, right? You're taking something that you've created and you're putting it out there for people to judge. And I think it's the most vulnerable, emotional, and personal thing that an individual can do. And because I can't think of anything else in life that compares to that. Can you?
No, I mean, maybe raising children, you can get attached to what people think of your child.
Yeah. But at some point they have a mind of their own and they can make their own decisions. Like, the art you put out there can't speak. It can't tell somebody to shut the fuck up. It is always and forever attached to you. Right. With no, it's not personified. You can personify inanimate objects, but it's not going to jump up off the table and go in a life of its own, right? So yeah.
No, you're right. It's very vulnerable, and you have to be willing to just say, I even addressed this in an earlier podcast where I talk about I made the connection when I say someone's not on your path. I'll say, if I have a bad experience with the person, I'll be like, oh, they're just not on my path. And instead of getting mad or telling them they're not on my path, I just walk in the opposite direction. I think that's what you did with the review. And we jump to that, and we're in a society where everybody's blah blah, right? They're posting back and forth, and to make that decision to not respond, is a powerful.
It's super powerful. It lifts a weight off of yourself. And now, look, I'll be the first to admit that I am not a high road person. I don't like taking the high road. I'm a fighter. I like to fight back, right? And that's just me. That's my fiery personality. So it's really hard for me to do that. It's hard for me to take the high road. It's hard for me to walk away and not say anything. But most of those situations where it calls for that, it's such a much better feeling. You're left with a peace knowing that you know what, you know who you are, and maybe this person doesn't, and that's okay. And you can move on. Right. And it's a lot easier to do when it's a total stranger, as opposed to somebody that knows you. Right.
Right. Right. But I love everything you're saying. I mean, you're saying some wonderful things.
Thank you.
And you are.
Sometimes I can be profound. It just flows out my mouth because there's really not much of a filter, if you couldn't tell.
Well, you know, I honestly think that that's what the creative process is. It's when I consider that you're flowing something through you, like whatever you want to call it by name, a greater power or a bigger power or an energy. You're just letting it flow through you in the creative act.
Yeah. Yeah. And it takes a long time to get to that point. I mean, if people are extremely lucky if they're born with the ability to just let things roll off their back and they don't need life experience to give them that strength. I'm not that person. I needed my life experiences to give me the strength to let things go. And because I was not always the type of person that, could just be like, I'm just going to let this go. I don't let things go. Are you kidding? I'm like, get back here. Let's talk. I'm going to talk to you about this. Right. I can't leave things unsaid. I have to it's not about getting in the last word. It's just about, making your point, making yourself heard. And sometimes making your point and making yourself heard happens through being silent.
Well, see, Amy, you don't realize this, but you really do spit out some wonderful things. You really do.
I don't know how it happens, but it does sometimes.
I'm seeing little mini headlines, definitely. Sometimes the best way to be heard is to be silent. I mean, there's a t-shirt in that, maybe a guitar,
right.
Maybe a guitar design. I don't know, but you're right. Sometimes silence is just the best, most powerful, and most empowering thing you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. In every aspect of your life. Really, truly. And again, some people are born with that ability. And then some people like me have to learn it through life experiences. And those life experiences are crashing and burning, you have to go through the shit. You have to make the mistakes to get to the point where you're like, okay, I'm going to learn from this. I'm going to learn from the crash and burn aspects of my life that I've had. And I'm going to be better for it.
Wonderful. I mean, exactly. Every experience takes you further into knowing who you are. And you're right. I wish I would have been born someone that didn't care from a very young age, but it's been a long journey to get to this point. Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard. It's hard to do that.
And I remember what I think is progress is like, if something like that would have happened 10 years ago, I probably would have thought about it for 4 days.
Yeah.
And then,
right.
Then it was 3 days. And now it was literally like, I thought about it for 45 minutes, maybe.
Right. Yeah. It's amazing how over time, the more you deal with it and the more you learn how to deal with it, the easier it gets to be forgotten, and you can move on from it. Right.
Yeah. You just sit there, and I sat there, thought about it, thought, wow, this really bothers me. Why does it bother me? And then I thought, well, Chris, you got to remember that this person's perspective is different. You don't know who they are, where they're coming from, what kind of day they had, or even their defensiveness. Maybe they didn't want to hear those things. I don't know. And then they just go, okay, I'll be silent. I didn't respond, and I think that is really wonderful. I want to share something else that you mentioned that you've talked about, kind of a small thread through this whole conversation. I'm reading this wonderful paper by Anne Bogart. She is a director, and I quote her in my book, but she's writes about the creative process, and it's incredible. And she talks about how you cannot separate personal growth from creativity. They come together.
Yeah, very true. Oh, for sure. I mean, when I first started this process, like the first guitar I ever did looks like a 5-year-old did it. I mean, it's so rudimentary. And I mean, literally a kindergartner could have done something like that, right? But then you spend time honing your craft, and you spend time figuring out, what do I want this to be? And then that's in your studio, right? But then in your real life, you're doing the same thing with yourself. You're like, who do I want to be? Like, what kind of person do I want to be? How do I want to live my life? And, what do I want others to think about me? Do I care what others think about me? All of that, it gets incorporated. It works hand in hand. And as you go through life and you learn things about yourself, you also go through the process of your art and you continue to learn how you want it to be. And it mimics you, kind of like what we were saying, like your personality is your art. And, it's like we all grow and change over time. Our art should do the same, because otherwise then we're just stuck and we're not moving forward in life, and life imitates art, right?
Right. I think it does. And you're talking about when you do the glass work and how you get so caught up and you have to be slow, and it makes you calm down and it makes you be present. And that's where the personal growth comes from, that reflection.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when I work, it's funny. When I work in my studio, I'm usually in my pajamas. And I'm watching sports on television and I have it muted, and then I'm listening to whatever music I'm in the mood for that day, right? I tried to do what you do. Like I was working on a Rolling Stone guitar, and so I put the Rolling Stones on while I was working on the guitar, and it actually funny enough, I've never done that, Chris. Like, how could I have gone 13 years and not thought, hey, why don't I listen to the band that I'm creating on this guitar? I mean, how dumb am I to not actually do that, right? But I did it, and I was like, oh yeah, this totally works for me, right? I mean, it was lovely. Like the whole experience was fantastic. But yeah, I mean, it's funny because I kind of feel like my personality is like an onion. I have a lot of layers. There's a lot of things about me that, you wouldn't know unless you keep digging and peeling back all of those layers. But, I have, with my passion for music, I also have a huge passion for sports. I grew up an athlete, and I love sports just as much as I love music. So it really like feeds my energy when I'm working to be able to have both those elements as a part of my process, right? But it's kind of like what you do with your new exhibit, where you're playing the same song for a piece, and because that drives you, it drives you to create that piece, of art. And it's the same with what I do, right? Same.
So two questions. What is your favorite sport?
So I grew up playing golf, believe it or not. But actually, and I love golf. I do. I mean, I call it my sanctuary. Like when I go to church, I go to the golf course. That's what I do. That's where I'm at peace most. But my biggest passion is tennis. I love to play tennis. I love to watch tennis. I love everything about tennis. So I guess those two would be my favorite sports, but I also love football. I'm a big football fan. Yeah, I mean, there really isn't a sport I don't like, except, I don't know, some of those stupid things like cornhole or some shit like that they put on ESPN2, and, when they don't have anything else to air.
I was seeing, this glass work done on whether it's a golf club or an old tennis racket. They make those old wooden right. tennis rackets.
It's actually not a bad idea.
Yeah, connect the two. It's like, mixing two flavors together. I think there was a Seinfeld episode where George decided he wanted to have sex with a woman while eating chocolate or something. Do you remember that? He's like eating in bed while he's in bed, and he says, mix two things together.
That's right. Yeah. That's basically what I'm doing. So because if I tried to have sex and create a guitar, it would be very, very bad. The amount of blood and the damage to bodies would be horrible. So instead, I incorporate my other loves, which is music and sports.
That is too great. Well, and the other thing I wanted to share with what I'm trying to do with the show is this is really hard for me. Instead of planning out the painting, I'm just listening to music and randomly throwing stuff on that canvas and seeing what it wants to say. Very scary.
Yeah. Oh, that's actually probably one of my favorite things to do. And there's a guitar hanging at the gallery here in Dallas that I call Go with the Flow. And it's this most simplest description, because that's exactly what was happening as I was creating it. I was just going with the flow. Like I would put music on, put a tennis match on the television, and I would just start cutting, and whatever happened on the guitar happened in that moment. And it's probably my favorite guitar that I've ever created because it wasn't planned. It wasn't a specific design or a specific band. It was just an abstract, random, go with the flow moment. And I haven't done it. I haven't done it again since because I don't want to be disappointed because it came out so fantastic that I'm afraid I'll never be able to replicate it again. Right. And I don't want to replicate it. That's the one thing about my pieces of art. Each guitar is totally unique. I try not to replicate designs. If I do, I change up the design in some way to make it, different from the previous one. But it's such a great piece that I'm afraid that if I try the process again, it's not going to come out the way that I want it to, or anywhere close to how it first came out. So I gotta think of something else. I gotta find another way.
Well, I think what I would say is just focus on, it's not, so don't think about what the finished work will be. Just remember the experience you had when you did it, and make that the goal. The goal is to have the experience of creating in that flow.
Right. Well, and that's what's so great about, I think, what every artist does is each time you're in it, it's a different experience than the next. Like I'm never going to replicate what it was like for me to do the 6 guitars I just finished. Because the next time I do something like that, it's going to feel totally different. And it's going to, I'm going to be in a different place in my mind. I'm going to be in a different place in my life, even if it's just separated by a week, you're still in a different place, every day you wake up, you're in a different place. So emotionally, that is, maybe
no, you're
not.
right. It's always one of a kind, right? Yeah. Everything, it's always one of a kind.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what's so special about original work. It's always original. I mean, you can't go back in time. You can't replicate who you were or how you felt or the music you were listening to or the golf game you were watching.
Yeah, exactly. Or who won that tennis match. I can't replicate that again.
Oh my gosh, this has been a great conversation. I love your energy, and if you send me some images of your work, I will put them over the video. But is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you want to explain about your work or that's important to you? Or
I don't think so. I mean, we've covered a lot. This has been great. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this. If there's one thing that comes with doing this for a long period of time, it's confidence, and the confidence in knowing how you're doing what you're doing and why you're doing what you're doing, and the confidence in knowing that what you're doing is good enough, right? And it takes a while to get to that point. And that's why I'm glad that we did this, now as opposed to 10 years ago, because that's the space I'm in now, and I think every artist should eventually get to that space. And they may not start in that space. I know I didn't, but I'm in that space now. And I think that kind of what helps make all the negativity that may come at you not so important anymore, because you are in a place where you're confident in what you do, and you know that what you do is good enough, and that's really all that matters, is what you think.
Yeah, it's true. And I think as you sharpen those skills, you get more confidence, and oftentimes you get more. The irony is you get more popular. Like people are starting, you get recognized in your artwork. Your guitars are getting shipped out all over the world, and suddenly, so you are putting yourself in front of new people and more experiences.
Yeah, that comes with the confidence in your craft, right? In what you do. And it also comes out in your work too. Like the more confidence you have in yourself, the better your work's going to be. And then, like what you said before, people feel that energy from your work. And sometimes if the energy that goes into it is negative, that's the energy they're going to feel when they see it. So you have to get to the point where what you're putting into it is positive. And then, nothing but great things should come from there.
See, once again, you said something really great. That's exactly what I was dealing with on this painting earlier this week. I was trying to rush through it, and all they would see is someone rushing through it. Right. They would feel it in the stroke and the hit and they'll see that impatience, and that you're right. So I had to slow down.
Yeah.
And then
walk away.
Sometimes go and save it for tomorrow.
Exactly. Right. Open a bottle of wine and just roll with it, man.
Flow with it. Well,
roll with it.
thanks again for being on the podcast. I
Of
would
course.
like, it's been lovely.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. This has been great. So thanks for having me.
Great. I'd like to remind the listeners that to follow this podcast on the channel so that when new episodes come up, it will remind you to listen. These are always inspiring. And actually, I've had some people tell me they listen to the podcast while they're working. So
perfect. I did the other day. It was lovely. Again, I told you, you have such a soothing voice. I was like, I could listen to this guy talk all day long.
That's so sweet. I'll take that. I'll take that this week. But thank you. Yeah, so follow this podcast. It's also available on YouTube where you can watch it and see it visually. And we will talk to you soon on the Spiritual Artist Podcast.